Oh, this hand's looking killer. This hand's looking a little creamy, if I do say so myself. Fuck. We're getting FTK'd. Well, not a lot we can do about that. Anyone have any good books they've been reading lately? Chat, let's begin The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. On February the 1st, 1887, the Lady Vane was lost by collision with a derelict when about the latitude 1S and longitude 107W. On January the 5th, 1888, that is 11 months and 4 days after, my uncle, Edward Prendick, a private gentleman who certainly went aboard the Lady Vane at Callao and who had been considered drowned, was picked up in latitude 5 degree 3S and longitude 101 degree west in a small open boat, of which the name was illegible, but which is supposed to have belonged to the missing schooner Ipacuanca. He gave such a strange account of himself that he was supposed demented. Subsequently, he alleged that his mind was a blank from the moment of his escape from the Lady Vane. His case was discussed among psychologists of the time as a curious instance of the lapse in memory consequent among physical and mental stress. The following narrative was found among his papers by the undersigned, his nephew and heir, but unaccompanied by any definite request for publication. The only island known to exist in the region by which my uncle was picked up is Noble's Isle, a small volcanic islet and uninhabited. It was visited in 1891 by the HMS Scorpion. A party of sailors then landed but found nothing living thereon except certain curious white moths, some hogs and rabbits, and some rather peculiar rats. No specimen was secured of these. So that this narrative is without confirmation is in its most essential particular. With that understood, there seems no harm in putting this strange story before the public in accordance, as I believe, with my uncle's intentions. There is at least this much in its behalf. My uncle passed out of human knowledge at about latitude 5 degrees south and longitude 105 degrees east, and reappeared in the same part of the ocean after a space of 11 months. In some way, he must have lived during the interval, and it seems that a schooner called the Ipecacuanca, with a drunken captain, John Davis, did start from Africa with a puma and certain other animals aboard in January 1887, that the vessel was well known at several points in the South Pacific, and then it finally disappeared from those seas with a considerable amount of copra abroad, sailing to its unknown fate from Banya in December 1887, a date that tallies entirely with my uncle's story. Charles Edward Prendick. Chapter 1. In the Dinghy of the Lady Vane. I do not propose to add anything to what has already been written concerning the loss of the Lady Vane. As everyone knows, she collided with a derelict where 10 days out from Callao. The longboat with 7 of the crew was picked up 18 days after by HM gunboat Myrtle, and the story of their privations has become almost as well known as the far more terrible Medusa case. I have now, however, to add the published story of the Lady Vane, another as horrible, and certainly far stranger. It has hitherto been supposed that the 4 men who were in this dinghy perished, but this is incorrect. I have the best evidence for this assertion. I am one of the 4 men. But, in the first place, I must state that there never were 4 men in the dinghy. The number was 3. Constance, who was seen by the captain to jump into the gig, Daily News, March 17, 1887, luckily for us and unluckily for himself, did not reach us. He came down out of the tangle of ropes under the stays of the smashed bowsprit. Some small rope caught his heel as he let go, and he hung for a moment head downward. Then he fell and struck a block or spar floating in the water. We pulled towards him, but he never came up. I say luckily for us he did not reach us, and I might almost add luckily for himself, for there were only a small beaker of water and some sodden ship's biscuits with us. So sudden had been the alarm, so unprepared the ship for any disaster. We thought the people on launch would be better provisioned, though it seems they were not, and we tried to hail them. They could not have heard us, and the next morning when the drizzle cleared, which was not until past midday, we could see nothing of them. We could not stand up to look about us because of the pitching of the boat. The sea ran in great rollers, and we had much ado to keep the boat's head to them. The 2 other men who had escaped so far with me were a man named Helmar, a passenger like myself, and a seaman whose name I don't know, a short, sturdy man with a stammer. We drifted, famishing, and after our water had come to an end, tormented by an intolerable thirst for 8 days altogether. After the second day, the sea subsided slowly to a glassy calm. It is quite impossible for the ordinary reader to imagine those 8 days. He has not, luckily for himself, anything in his memory to imagine with. After the first day, we said little to one another, and lay in our places in the boat and stared at the horizon, or watched with eyes that grew larger and more haggard every day, the misery and weakness gaining upon our companions. The sun became pitiless. The water ended on the 4th day, and we were already thinking strange things and saying them with our eyes. But it was, I think, the 6th before Helmar gave voice to the thing we all had in mind. I remember our voices, dry and thin, so that we bent towards one another and spared our words. I stood out against it with all my might, was rather for scuttling the boat and perishing together among the sharks if that followed us, but Helmar said that if his proposal was accepted, we should have drink. The sailor came round to him. I would not draw lots, however, and in the night the sailor whispered to Helmar again and again, and I sat on the bows with my clasp knife in hand, though I doubt if I had the stuff in me to fight. And in the morning I agreed to Helmar's proposal, and we handed halfpence to find the odd man. The lot fell upon the sailor, but he was the strongest of us and he would not abide by it. He attacked Helmar with his hands. They grappled together and almost stood up. I crawled along the boat to them, intending to help Helmar by grasping the sailor's leg, but the sailor stumbled with the swaying of the boat, and the two fell upon the gunwale and rolled overboard together. They sank like stones. I remember laughing at that and wondering why I laughed. The laugh caught me suddenly, like a thing from without. And now, to play our turn. Ah! Fun! You know, I think we actually might win this. Hold up.